You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you to please subscribe to The Authenticity Show wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on social media. That means like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and check out our YouTube page. Our guest today is Jonathan Altfeld. Since 1997, after a successful career in artificial intelligence, Jonathan Altfeld has been offering unique and innovative NLP-based workshops around the globe. One of the things he does is called genius mapping, which is where he figures out how experts in their field do what they do, both from a conscious and an unconscious perspective. So somebody who's remarkably good at something might not necessarily be able to explain how they do it. Part of their competence is unconscious. And through this process called genius mapping, Jonathan Altfeld has figured out how to map that so other people can do it too. It's fantastic. And we get a real hands-on example of this in this episode, where he maps Satch's amazing ability to understand troubled students at the university where he works. It's great. We also get into other NLP-related topics, and it's fascinating the whole way through. So here we go.
Good afternoon, Satch and Jonathan. Welcome to the show.
All right. Good to have you, Jonathan.
Thank you both, Carlos and Satch, for having me on your Authenticity Show. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
All right. Us too, for sure.
Yeah. We've been hoping for this for a while, and we finally lassoed you in, and I'm so stoked to be able to get into this conversation with you. So much stuff.
Who knows where it might lead?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So for me now, I've been around a lot of NLP stuff just because I'm friends with Carlos and have been for so long.
Sure.
But I'm not an NLP guy. You know, I'm a novice. I'm not a trained person. So I help a regular schmo understand what this stuff is. So where's a good beginning for how to explain what this genius mapping is, this knowledge engineering stuff?
Oh, yeah. Sure. And first of all, I mean, let's all be regular schmoes. Why don't we? Because the moment we slip into, let's say, jargon-rich elitism, if you will, then it can be used to exclude people, and that's not my intent at all. And so, you know, if there's any way to understand that specific class, and that's not the end-all and be-all of NLP either. I mean, genius mapping is not equivalent to NLP. It's just one approach to capturing excellence. So let's give the Cliff Notes version of what NLP is. NLP began as a methodology to capture expertise and brilliance from extraordinary people, as well as applying that modeling capacity. And by modeling, we don't mean, standing on a catwalk. We're talking about modeling somebody else's model of the world and then trying it on ourselves in a more accelerated fashion. And the people that originated NLP, the co-founders, began with this methodology of attempting to figure out how to capture somebody else's brilliance. And the first people they did this with were therapists. And therapists, Gestalt psychologists, and also the amazing hypnotherapist Milton H. Erickson, and among many others. And in doing that modeling work, they collected a variety of accelerated change work techniques. And the first wave of NLP practitioners and master practitioners took these change work techniques and got extraordinary results with people, changing people's lives, improving people's lives, doing great work, helping people get quick changes that were longer lasting than what they might have gotten elsewhere. So the original push in the field was to help people change their lives for the better through hypnosis, hypnotherapy, different kinds of change work, and the techniques that came out of the first efforts in NLP now are often associated as NLP, but the techniques themselves are almost a distraction. Supposedly, at the core of this entire field is this capacity to model expertise. Now, I'm literally Johnny come lately. I didn't arrive on the scene in NLP until 1997, some 22 years after approximately when it started in 1975. So 1997, 1975, 97. And I got into it after many other people had been practitioners, master practitioners, trainers. And I was looking around and talking to people, and everyone was talking about modeling. And nobody was training it, or almost nobody was training. That's not entirely true. There were a variety of modeling methods being taught, but they were not easy to find. And they often required an arduous, long path to acquire the modeling skills. And most of the people who were talking about modeling couldn't really explain what it was. It was one of those things they gave lip service to while they were practicing the techniques of NLP, but they weren't actually doing any modeling.
Mm.
Now, my prior career before I arrived in NLP was in artificial intelligence. I would go into companies as a software engineer, specialized software engineer, and interview experts, find out what they knew, and then replicate that decision-making in software. So I was already doing modeling. I was already doing successful modeling. I was already getting paid to do successful modeling. And I was already having this great time capturing expertise from known experts and then using that decision-making to speed up training processes or to enable a business to reach 20 times the number of customers in the same amount of time. I mean, I was doing it. And so I arrived on the scene in NLP, fascinated by what I was learning, to be sure. But everybody was talking about modeling, couldn't do it. And I was doing it. So I noticed a big gap between the people who wanted to think they knew about modeling, or you can describe it any way you like, and the fact that I had these techniques coming into NLP that I was already using. And I started noticing some parallels. And this is where it got really interesting for me. I was still a student of NLP in my early explorations of NLP, and I started looking into Robert Dilts's sleight of mouth videos, and they were great, and they were full of references to rules, or what I would describe as rules, if-then means statements. I didn't originate that. It was just breaking down every possible human decision into an if-then means statement. And I realized, wow, I've just spent the last decade becoming a paid expert at if-thens, right? Actual expertise of if-thens. And I was now seeing parallels between that whole career and the NLP world. And so I thought, what if I were to teach all that stuff from artificial intelligence, specifically a field called knowledge engineering, and teach that to neurolinguistic programmers so that they could actually start doing all the modeling that they were paying lip service to. And lo and behold, it worked. I mean, it really worked. What I did find was difficult was I was having trouble tracking people to longer than 3-day courses for this knowledge engineering class. So I had to do it in a format that was still workable. The pros were more people got to take the knowledge engineering class and learn how to do this stuff. The cons, of course, were that people weren't getting masterful in just 3 days. They were getting just enough to be potentially dangerous, so to speak, with modeling expertise or with doing some coaching work. In other words, mapping beliefs and then being able to change them. And so over the last 20 some odd years has been this journey of evolving that knowledge engineering teaching process. And it's gone through multiple iterations, and things have been added to it and taken away. And now I've renamed it to Genius Mapping. So it's like Genius Mapping is KE 2.0. And it's now a 6-day course, which gets people to much higher functional levels of modeling expertise and also mapping problems for coaching clients so that when you deliver an intervention for your client, it is surgical, targeted. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's so extraordinary to be able to, in a paragraph, elicit 3 or 4 beliefs where you can pinpoint exactly the structure of somebody's stuck state, often just by asking a couple of follow-up questions and not pushing an intervention on somebody, just clarifying a couple of things. And then a single one-liner can be enough to totally free someone up to a whole new realm of possibilities. It's wonderful stuff. So
Jonathan,
I don't know if, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it sounds like this is something that you wouldn't have to have an NLP background to do. If you were a psychologist or an HR person who really had enough understanding of that, you probably could benefit from this, right?
I think anybody in any field could benefit from it. I do think people have certain proclivities that will make them capture the material faster than others might. But I think anybody with any background, no prerequisites whatsoever, would do great in the 6-day Genius Mapping course. I can't, looking back, say that was always true about the 3-day version of the course. 3 days was tight. but a 6-day certification course where there's ample time for practice and refinement and personal feedback loops with me where I can tune what people are doing and how they're doing it. I think people are heading home after 6 days with levels of skill that I could never have achieved with working with them as a teacher for just 3 days. So it's very exciting. It's very cool to be working at this level of refinement.
So cool. Another question for you. How do you define modeling for someone who doesn't understand what the hell that is? Like, I know it's psychological modeling is what we're talking about, right?
Sure. So you and I, we've been talking on the side about something that was partially completed during your Genius Mapping course. Can I use this as an example? Would that be all right?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Folks, this isn't planned. It really isn't. It's just sort of coming up with this stuff on the fly. So I got a couple of examples that come to mind. One of them is, let's start with yours. I guess it was a fellow named Wayne was at the course and had a chance to map some of your networking skills. Right. I know how good you are at networking. I mean, you collect friends like other people collect stamps or coins or what have you. You are great at it. And you've got a series of heuristics, a series of decision-making strategies about what constitutes a potential friend, among other things. What do you do at various times in the development of connection and whatnot? And I'm looking forward to diving into that a little bit further with you as well. If I knew that about you, and let's say I just met you because we were sitting next to each other on an airplane. Mm-hmm. If I knew that about you and we were captive audiences for each other, I could, in 4 or 5 hours, as we headed from one coast to another, sitting next to you, I could get more knowledge about how you do what you do using Genius Mapping than I personally think the vast majority of the rest of the public could ever get from you. Because not only would I be able to capture what you know, that's your conscious knowledge, I would notice gaps and weird patterns in what you don't know, that's the unconscious knowledge. And I've got a whole collection of questions that are designed to look at what I do know, see the gaps, and then ask about those. And so the first round of questions would just be getting you to talk while I'm trying to take notes as quickly as I can. And then I convert that to a series of belief statements that I want to map out. And then I start asking the follow-up questions like, so in this case, if this happens and this happens, that result happens. And that means this for you, right? And you give me a nod or saying, yeah, but also there's this other circumstance. And these little exception comments that start flying out are really interesting to me because it tells me whether there's an alternative choice at that moment or there are additional conditions that you consciously don't keep track of. And I start getting into the unconscious heuristics of your decision making. And the vast majority of the unwashed public out there, so to speak, doesn't know how to do that. And they don't know how to ask in a targeted way what you know but don't know, right? The unconscious stuff. And so all they get from most people is the top 10 lists. You've all read the top 10 lists. I've probably written a couple here and there. So when people are creating content, we often have to write these top 7 or these top 10 places to get ice cream, or the top 7 ways to make your partner smile, or whatever it is. That's what seems to be easily digestible content nowadays. I don't want the top 7 or top 10 lists. I want to start with that, but then I want to start asking for, okay, but what are the unconscious exceptions? So I see it as an incredibly rapid way to get not only what someone knows they know, but also what they don't know they know. And that's deep expertise, because most expertise is really subconscious, because the act of going from pretty good at something to expert at it requires us to sublimate all the detail. Oh, it's still there. We can access it real time when we need to. But having conscious access to it is not something we want to distract our brains by. So we chunk it into a larger and larger chunks that we store deeper and deeper in our subconscious minds. So if, for example, we had a chance to spend time with our buddy James, right? James Tsoukalos, who is brilliant at snooker.
Yes.
Right. So not only is he consciously gifted with his strategies, but he's also got all the muscle movement. right? He's got all of the unconscious stuff. And so if we wanted to get good at snooker, if you only asked him conscious-oriented type questions like, what should I do next, right? And he'll tell you what he knows you should do. You'll get some knowledge. But if someone used genius mapping and got him to give up some of the unconscious conditions and choices that he makes, we would get significantly better further in our development of those skills in the same amount of time using genius mapping than we would by using primarily conscious methods. So I see it as if someone's good at genius mapping, they can get a fast track to anybody's expertise. That's how I view it. So
that sounds great, because how often in life do we say, gosh, if I could just take what that person can do and put it in a bottle.
Right, exactly.
I could sell it, and I could, and you've got a distillation process for putting it in a bottle, so to speak.
Sure. Could we play a little bit, guys?
Let's
play.
Okay. Ask you if we could do this.
Let's play.
Absolutely.
Let's play the whole time. Yeah.
So I know Carlos. I'm sure I don't know him as well as I'd like to, and I don't know you very well at all. I've watched and listened to a couple of the more than a couple of the authenticity shows, and I've been particularly interested with your thespian theatrical background, and would love to ask you, whether it's this or some other area, tell me something you know you're really good at, naturally good at, that you wish you could share with others.
Okay, so we're talking about the thespian sort of thing here.
Well, it doesn't have to be that. It could be that. It could be something else. I'm just saying that's something of interest.
Okay.
But let's ask you personally, something you know you're naturally good at that you wish you were better at sharing with others.
Let's see, something that I know that I'm good at that I wish I could share with others better. Let's see. Oh gosh, I guess. Let's see what comes to mind here.
Take your time. So this is an odd question, right?
I guess I could go something sort of more concrete or something a little more esoteric. Okay, well, one of the things that I know I'm good at that I do wish I could share with others would be I seem to have a way to be understanding with other people when others aren't, and can usually go into that and help create harmony. And I wish I could package that up and be able to reproduce that, because I don't always know how I do that, and I wish others could do that too.
Brilliant. So I don't know the full scope of this skill yet, and I know that if we were to go into in depth and capture most or all of it, it could take anywhere from half an hour to 10 hours. It doesn't sound like it's a vast area of expertise like an entire career would be, but it does sound like there could be quite a number of skills that fold together in there, and or decision strategies and or moods or state management. In any case, I'm going to work with one or two beliefs, and we'll see if we can pull out something that you can share with somebody else. So let me get a clarification on the word understanding. Would you say tolerant or understanding?
You know, I suppose there's an element of both, but if I had to pick, I think I would pick understanding.
Okay.
So it might start with tolerance, but I think behind that is understanding.
So when you use the word understanding, are you thinking about it as a sense of knowing how and why they're in the circumstance they're in? It's not just avoiding passing judgment. It's more about, I'm just getting a frame right now.
Sure, yeah.
So it's more about having a sense of what's going on for them so you can communicate to it or with it?
Yeah, that seems accurate. Yeah.
Cool. That's a great skill. I mean, it's wonderful. Right. So how do you know that you're better at that than others? Are there circumstances where you see other people reacting less elegantly than you are, and you compare it to your own approach is more elegant or more friendly or supportive or understanding? Of course.
Sure.
Is it typically to identify that as understanding, there would be a comparative in there somewhere?
Yeah. I suppose the way I describe what I feel, like if I think of this kind of scenarios like this, I think there's a willingness to go ahead and be understanding long enough to get to where we need to get to.
That's great. So multiple things are coming out of this, and I'm starting to get a sense of, I refer to these as clouds or subclouds of processing. We've got areas of processing and thinking that are all related to each other that get us through a circumstance. So one of the things that you just identified is that you have an outcome, which is to get to some result. And the other peers that you would compare or contrast your more understanding approach to theirs, that might be a critical distinction that they don't have, which is they don't have an outcome to get to some deeper level of understanding. And you do.
I'd say, that's true. That's true.
Right,
and
so that's one thing.
Words,
So we'll keep that in mind. We'll put a little pin in it, so to speak, because that's the end point in the cloud process of moving. My construct in genius mapping moves from left to right as a representation of time. So in the beginning of some circumstance, I'm just going to zero in for the moment in one belief. We're just going to operate on one and see if we get the full body nod. Carlos knows all about this one. So we'll see if it plays out. So put me in a circumstance where you know you're being more tolerant. What has to happen for you to be more understanding than someone else might be? Put us in a situation.
Okay.
What's true about that moment?
So, okay. For example, suppose maybe I could just give a kind of a scenario that would kind of capture this.
Perfect.
Maybe is that good? Okay.
The simpler the conditions, the better.
Suppose I've got a student, right? I work at a university. Suppose I've got a student who's gotten themselves into some kind of mess, some kind of trouble, right? And there is this tendency. There's a natural tendency in education to sort of sum up this person and say, well, either you got it or you don't. Either you understand or you don't understand. And hey, those, sink or swim. If you can make it, awesome. If you don't get it, sorry, that's too bad. We tried to support you, but there's nothing we can do. You're out.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And I usually go into those situations with this idea, like to kind of pull out what you helped me uncover just moments ago about having an end goal, is I sort of know that with a little bit more prolonged understanding and openness and willingness for a little while, we will eventually get that person to succeed in discovering whatever it is that they need to discover in order to be successful.
Lovely.
And it's kind of usually what I'm going for. That might be a kind of a classic scenario, if that helps.
Fair enough. So for Carlos, if you're tracking, we just heard one belief and then it fed into two more in sequence.
Yeah.
All right. So with the third one at the end point of having the student know what they need to know to be successful. Let's come back to the first one, which is if a student comes to you and they're in trouble, that's two conditions, right?
Okay.
We know there's a tendency for binary judgments from the university setting, but you don't apply those, do you? Okay.
Correct.
So because you don't apply those, even though you know that's out there, we're going to set it aside because it's not what happens in your head. So if a student comes to you and they're in trouble, are there circumstances where you do nothing, or there are circumstances where you would, your first inclination would be to ask them what they want or something like that? I mean, what would be the action, and are there additional conditions for what you would do first?
Let's see. The first thing I do is I go ahead and I connect with them first.
Good.
It's the first thing I do is I connect with them. And I go ahead and I let them tell me their story, whatever it is, because I can feel that they are afraid of all these judgments that are coming up and that they need to convince me of something.
Right.
And I go ahead and allow that to just be.
Beautiful.
Until I get them to a new state.
Time out. And the reason I'm asking a timeout, and by the way, I didn't have time to do the full pre-talk, but I tend to interrupt out of respect for your time.
Okay.
You're the expert.
Okay.
I deeply respect your expertise, but if I let you go on for a long time, then I'm actually not modeling what I'm aiming to model. I'm getting almost too much information. So what I have is that a student comes to you and they're in trouble. Your first inclination is to connect and get their story.
Yeah.
Is that true?
True. Yeah.
What are you seeing, Carlos?
Yes.
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 Okay. So tell me about the emotional value to you. The emotional value to you, Satch,
Okay.
in connecting and getting someone's story when they're in trouble.
The emotional value.
I'm not talking about the next step or what it can enable for you. I'm asking about what do you feel at the moment you choose to get their story and connect with them?
I feel that I go into a space with them that feels rare and sacred.
Sacred.
Yeah.
Oh. So when a student comes to you and they're in trouble, you choose to connect with them and get their story. And that for you has a sacred space to it.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm getting a mostly full body nod. It feels like there may be something else. It might be a mixed state. Is it both sacred and also empathy? What else is relevant there? Or desire for empathy that you don't yet have? I don't know which.
So there's a sacredness there. Let's see. What is it? What is it that I'm feeling here when I go into this state?
Good.
I think what it is, the best way I can describe it is that there's an outcome that I want to get.
So purposeful.
There's a purpose there. It's almost like there's something that we can manifest together.
Interesting.
And if we I guess if I feel like I'm willing enough to stay in that space, we can get there.
Willingness.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to keep the sacred word, even though that's more of a description than an emotion. I'm going to keep sacred willingness, maybe. Now we're getting the oscillation, right, Carlos?
Yeah.
Okay, so once again, just to be sure we've got it, Satch,
okay.
If a student comes to you and they're in trouble, you're going to choose to connect with them and get their story, or get their story, which results in connecting either way. And for you, that is a sacred space, and it's a willingness.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Does that feel 100% congruent, or is there something else that's relevant to this choice point in your life?
I mean, I would say that's pretty close. I suppose I could dig and see what else comes up, you know?
Yeah, I've already got one, and I can run it by you just to see.
Sure.
But I think it is close.
Okay.
Like, for example, does this happen with every student that comes to you that's in trouble? Or would it have to be somebody you believe has redeeming value and potential? Or are there rare people that you have just decided that you're just not interested in helping?
Okay, I would say it's almost everybody. Almost everybody.
Yeah.
That there's going to be some rare exceptions, I would say. I mean, even if I know the student's doomed, I'll still try to go into that space and work.
That's great.
Although I might come to a conclusion that this is a situation that is just way beyond, you know, they have a right to go ahead and make their mistakes sometimes.
Got it.
You
You just gave us an unconscious condition that you didn't initially know you had. And I would never have known that you had unless I asked for it. So I'm going to add two conditions to the if side of it. So I'm going to say, if a student comes to you and they're in trouble and you don't think it's beyond your means to assist them, right? Oh, there's a big one.
Yeah.
And there aren't any number of other unusual exceptions that would just make you say no. Then you're going to connect with them and get their story.
Yeah.
And that's about a sacred space and a willingness to work with them.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there it is.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that little nugget of wisdom is a decision, a choice point that other people don't have. That's the first sort of big aha description.
Okay.
We have an if with a fully elicited set of conditions. We have a then with one or more results.
Okay.
And we have an emotional value to you about that choice point. It's not the emotion you want to get to down the line. That's a whole separate thing. But that moment in your life, think of it as there's neural circuitry that goes on up there that makes us make one decision or another. It's like any fork in the road can be represented by one of these if-then-mean statements.
Okay.
So if we sequence enough of these together, and there's lots of different options. It's not just one sequence, it's not just a flow chart. There's options. We can capture the whole area of your expertise, your genius for tolerance and understanding, and maybe even your ability to help students in trouble.
Okay.
We could capture that, and we could train other people in the university setting and combat that binary judgmental frame that's so prevalent out there.
Wow.
I see that as wonderful, pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And anybody's got expertise like this.
Okay, cool.
Because everybody becomes an expert or a genius at something, whether or not they know it's genius. I mean, somebody could be the best peanut butter and jelly maker on the planet. Someone could be the best skateboarder or the best skier or the best at calming themselves after an argument. I mean, it doesn't matter. Everybody's got expertise. And this is a way of mapping it. The sky's the limit as to how important that is.
So you have like mapped all kinds of people's geniuses and have like a backlog of all these well, let's map this let's try this person's style on.
So about 85-90% of the work that I've done with genius mapping is behind a non-disclosure, which kills me because there's some great stuff that I'd love to share, but there's a lot that I can't, and there's a lot that I could be able to if I went through a process of requesting that. And I'm hoping that as genius mapping as a course continues to get out there, then we'll have some more genius maps that can be sold, which would be lovely, because I think it's more valuable than any book, because the book, if someone writes a book, it's their brain dump. It's what they know they know.
Yeah.
And no one will be able to read someone's book that they consciously wrote down and get the same results. Nobody, because it's not enough to know just what they consciously know.
Right. Yeah. Nobody writes a subconscious autobiography, right? That's what we need, the subconscious autobiography.
That's called channeling.
Channeling. Yeah,
it does exist. Edgar Casey did that.
Edgar Casey, I was going to say.
Wasn't he the sleeping prophet or something?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He'd go into his sleep and then all this stuff would get written, supposedly. Anyway, what was that funny quote from what was it, 20 years ago? Was it there are known knowns and there are unknown knowns, or known unknowns, or what was that? It was a presidential quote. Do you remember this?
No.
It sounds familiar.
I think it was
familiar.
Bush Senior maybe who did it. I don't remember which one, but it was like the known knowns and the unknown knowns.
Known knowns and the unknown knowns.
Yes.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
It had to do with terrorism, probably. But
not gonna repeat it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. All about Saddam.
Yeah. Saddam Hussein.
Yeah.
That's great.
I always loved Dana Carvey's impersonations of him. He would say 1,000 points of light.
Yeah.
He would a new world order. Right. Yeah, that's great.
It's funny, the 1,000 points of light thing reminds me of like a Carl Sagan bastardization.
Yeah.
Billions and billions and billions, that kind of
No, Dana Carvey would be a fun person to genius map. Yeah.
Oh, you're not kidding. I'd love for that opportunity.
That'd be awesome.
Wow.
That's great.
Was it fun or not fun being a model? Give us the honest, authentic.
It was fun, actually. It was totally cool. I liked it because one, I think the way you started it off is we found something that I honestly do think would be cool for other people to be able to do. So it's an honor to share that.
Isn't it? That's awesome.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing is it's sort of fun to discover yourself, right? I discovered things about myself that I had no idea were happening because I never thought about it until you asked me the questions. I was like, oh, is that what's going on? That is what's going on. Huh. Well, that's nice to know,
That's the common response is that people are getting to know their own knowledge system, their own decision process, their own values, their own everything. And it, even though I drive the process, people drive the content, the exemplar, and the person who's the example, the expert or what have you, or the therapeutic client, the subject, you in this case.
Okay.
you know I'm not leading you unless you're stuck and I'm trying to jog your memory. It's
Totally,
all
yeah.
your content. You drive all the content. I drive the process.
Yeah.
But at the end result, I'm repeating to you something that is going on in your brain, or at least will go on in your brain at some future circumstance, or has gone on in the past. So by traversing that decision repeatedly, refining it as we go, we get closer and closer to the actual or the actual neural choice point for you.
Okay.
And it feels so good to be understood.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Start giving the full body nod.
Yeah.
Like initially, if I'm close but not really, I start getting, yeah.
Okay. You go
But then
from
when
this
people get
to
closer,
oh yeah. Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
The whole upper body gets into it.
Oh.
And it feels really good to be validated that way, and to have our
Totally.
process reflected as valuable and useful. And so it's pretty cool. It's a deep process.
So here's a question that came to mind from doing this process is you can map somebody's genius, whatever skill, technique they have, or how they do something. So it sounds like you could also, because you could use a map to get somewhere, or you could use a map to get out of trouble.
Yes.
So
and those are the two primary uses of Genius Map.
Okay, so you can do it to find out how somebody's making a mistake and how can they get out of that situation too.
And mistake is one definition. Another could be that their therapeutic problem or challenge needs to be mapped so we can use a targeted intervention. Lots of NLP techniques are brilliant and work well, especially if they're well suited to the challenge that's presented. But not every challenge presented necessarily maps well to a specific NLP intervention. In which case, and also, it's also true that in the field of NLP, the quality of practitioners produced over the years has declined sharply. As NLP practitioner training started at around a month or longer, and they keep shrinking, I've kept mine at around 10 days for quite some time. But I know James does more than 20 days of NLP training for a practitioner level. And that's extremely rare. The vast majority of people aren't even doing 70 courses any longer for a practitioner.
Okay.
So what one trainer produces isn't the same as what another trainer produces. And frankly, most practitioners couldn't do this level of work. So they will, it's like having a whole bunch of new hammers and everything is a different color nail that they can hammer in. Genius mapping is not like that at all. It looks for the structure of someone else's stuck state or problem or difficulty or less elegant behavior or their habit, and it looks at the structure of their habits and why they're still doing them. So it's frequently the case that while a genius mapping student who's working on having one of their own problems mapped, they're halfway through it and they've already solved it. So sometimes it takes a little longer, so it needs to be mapped, and the person who is doing the genius mapping might want to, once they know more about the struck state, they will help with an intervention that's very targeted. But most of the time, people are halfway through the mapping process. They're like, oh my gosh, I never knew I did that for that reason. I'm done. I'm over it. Forget it. I've solved it.
Wow.
And they often don't want to continue with the mapping.
Wow. Okay.
Finish the exercise.
Yeah. But I'm full, right?
Exactly, right.
Yeah. I couldn't eat another bite. Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. It can be used for solving problems just as it can be used for capturing expertise fast that is deeper than just the top 10 lists.
And how so like we just did something with me, we just did something that was kind of more psychological. Yeah. You can use it for like physical skills. Maybe somebody wants to shoot a better free throw, things like that, or is it not quite going to that realm?
It's a great question. And the answer is, if what someone is doing physically involves unconscious knowledge, then genius mapping would be valuable. Okay. If what is known that we're trying to map is fully conscious for the athlete, let's say, and the modeler is asking the athlete, and the athlete is a good teacher of their own skills, then I don't know to what degree I would call upon genius mapping. That could end up being a less efficient way of replicating the physical movements. But if there's strategy involved, like if it's just how to throw a better 3-point throw, I would say leave genius mapping out of the equation, unless you're using genius mapping to get fitness knowledge, nutrition advice, things like that. But for the free throw or the 3-point throw, I would say just throw 100 or 1,000 balls.
Just regular coaching. Get your technique down.
And get direct feedback from someone who knows better than you, so that they can tune your movement and your arc and all of that.
Yeah,
that's a faster way to learn from great coaches who know physical movement. But the moment there's strategy, the moment there's heuristics and decision making, genius mapping is better than anything else that it is.
Got it.
So you're absolutely right. There is a limitation on the scope of its usefulness. But anytime there's like, I would never want to use genius mapping to map how a surgeon moves a scalpel. Huge waste of time, big distraction. Probably not as good as being able to hold the surgeon's hand, gently while they're doing it. If you can get a mentor who lets you do that, then you'd learn surgical skills you'd never get from discussing things, because you capture things somatically, kinesthetically with your body. There's no question that other learning methods are just as useful in different circumstances.
Jonathan,
cool questions.
Yeah, this is great. Jonathan, would you talk about explicit versus implicit modeling?
Oh, sure. And that also puts a frame around genius mapping. So we already did talk about that just now with the surgeon example, or even the basketball throwing. Anytime that you are replicating somebody else's behavior with your eyes, creating the eye-brain-body loop or circuit, that's implicit modeling. If I adopt what I think someone else is doing and I replicate the behavior real time, and I do it a lot, and I keep refining the movement, that's implicit modeling. The moment we start discussing things and consciously unpacking what someone is doing, that's explicit modeling. Some would say that NLP modeling, and I would agree with this, NLP modeling is implicit modeling. It's monkey see, monkey do. And that is a big distinction between what we call NLP modeling today and genius mapping. The two are not the same. So for someone who wanted to learn NLP modeling only for monkey see, monkey do behavior work, implicit acquisition of skills, unconscious uptake of the refinements of how someone is doing something, genius mapping will not provide that. It would not. However, the moment we get into strategy, the moment we get into the balance between unconscious knowledge and conscious knowledge, that's explicit modeling. And we are bringing to the explicit conscious attention what might have been unconscious before. So in effect, genius mapping does get knowledge from implicit modeling into explicit modeling. But both have their value. And a surgeon, if I were a young surgeon wanting to model a genius surgeon, I would use implicit modeling as much as possible, because I can always get the explicit stuff in a classroom or by sitting in on an operation and asking questions directly. That's explicit modeling. But implicit modeling is of immense value. And just as a picture's worth 1,000 words, physically replicating somebody else's gift is worth 1,000,000 words. If you have enough time to repeat a behavior and keep repeating it with refinement and visual feedback without any kind of conscious chatter going on, that's wonderful. But some skills are suited for that and some are not. So.
I remember you talking about a couple of scenarios that genius mapping are just really ideal for. You were talking about like the dinosaur in the business that just really has the skills, and you've got a bunch of up and coming folks that are maybe have the same degree, but they're not performing to the same level. And the concern of the company is that, the dinosaur who we love is probably going to retire sometime soon.
Right.
And what are we going to do? Is there going to be a huge knowledge gap, experiential gap with the people who are in that section of the business? Is that going to affect our income long term? Is it going to, create a dip in sales or what have you?
Right.
Talk about that for a second.
Sure. It's been the case at every business I've ever consulted at that there was always somebody on the way out the door soon who was ready to retire, or maybe they'd become financially independent and just didn't want to put in the hours working anymore. But those people who have a gift, who have very expensive knowledge gained either by experience or by experience at school and combined, these are the geniuses at the company that the company is petrified of losing. So there's often a lot of fear and anxiety around the expert leaving, and a worry about how expensive it is to train new people to get them even remotely close to where the expert is. So for whatever reason, people are on the way out of a career job, and there's a great deal of worry about keeping the knowledge inside the company. That's prevalent. It's a universal experience. I'm sure there's a rare company that doesn't have that at this moment, but if they don't now, they will at some point. Somebody gifted and knowledgeable is going to leave eventually. And so since it's a universal experience, you'd think companies would have a more universal solution for it, and they don't.
They don't.
They don't. And you know what's amazing is when presented with an ideal way of solving it, often they don't pull the trigger because they have so many worries, they generalize the worries to everything else. And no decision feels good. That's also prevalent.
Yeah. Wow.
So what if someone who's an expert, who's got very expensive knowledge, could have their expertise captured, and that expertise could be trained to new people in less time than traditional ways of interviewing an expert and then training would do. If you present that to an executive, you'd think the smart ones would jump at the opportunity. But many of them are like, well, we don't know about your system, your method. We don't know how easy it is to capture somebody else's unconscious soft skills. We're just going to try and get past this as best we can, see if we can have somebody shadow the expert for a year or two. What an enormous waste of time and money.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of salary.
Big mistake.
When the person could have learned it in a very short period of time.
Well, especially when at the end, according to the process that you teach, they would have a product, either a workbook, a manual, a training course that would be developed that could be washed, rinsed, repeated over and over again in the future.
Exactly. Yes.
Wow. So I got a question. So we've gotten into the modeling aspect of it, where you extract the data.
Right.
What's the teaching of that like? Like when you teach another person, is there a similar methodology to how that's done?
Well, depends on who you ask. If you ask a knowledge engineer who had not had any NLP training, they would probably revert to what they used to know about education, which was outline, instruction, and hope for the best.
PowerPoint.
Yes, there would be heavy reliance on PowerPoint, which I don't think PowerPoint is evil. I think using it as a crutch is evil. But you can use it as a visual aid and still make the training experiential, and that can be valuable. I don't have a problem with PowerPoint if it's used intelligently to augment a dynamic learning experience. There's nothing wrong with having visual aids. The issue is if that becomes the only focus and you repeat the words that are on the, it's like, I'm just going to read this for you because your eyes aren't good enough. I mean, right. That's not training. So So that would be a more typical approach. However, an NLP trained trainer, if they know something about the format method, or if they've got other kinds of educational paradigms for instructing, you can create a dynamic experience that speaks to multiple learners' styles. You can deliver information in a visual format, in an auditory format, in a kinesthetic format. You can use something called a discovery method, which essentially creates training segments of building blocks and then experiences where people will use the building blocks together and won't really realize until the penny has already dropped that they were learning a lot more than they thought they were learning. And that they can use and do what they didn't expect that they could do in a shorter period of time. So I think using advanced educational methods to train people makes people go, wow. I mean, the eureka moments start flying left and right.
I'm chomping at the bit right now because I just want to share this. As soon as you said that, I had described you a couple of times as a ninja trainer because I was very surprised at what I knew, but didn't know that I knew because of what you taught, but I didn't know you were teaching it.
Cool.
It was so cool. It was like an Easter egg, that's something. Right. Wait, how did what?
Yeah,
That was great.
so that's the fun part is when you start getting the oh shit moments, like, oh my God, I just did what I didn't realize I knew how to do. So that combined with the realization people have that I've just trained something consciously, but I've been demonstrating it from day one. Right. So what is that? When you demonstrate and then you explain later, that's different than conscious training. That's using a combination of multiple training methods. And so when you combine demonstration without explicitly describing what you're doing, and you do it repeatedly, you're essentially doing something called semantic priming. And you're building response potential, and people get exposed to a pattern before the pattern becomes explicit. Then when you describe it, some people get it more quickly when you describe it, having demonstrated it a lot first. And others will go, wait a minute, holy shit, you were doing that 3 days ago.
Yeah.
And I would say, yeah, okay, and this surprises you. And so so that is definitely the fun part of my job, is seeing the light bulbs go off.
You get this question a lot about NLP being pseudoscience and all of the links that talk about the studies that show that it's a bunch of crap. And I hear this over and over and over again from people. And some of the list of complaints about people who practice NLP are probably valid complaints. It's certainly not universal, but there are people who definitely exemplify those qualities. The snake oil salesman, we've seen it before. I'm kind of curious about how you approach answering that for people who are genuinely interested, but they're kind of feeling a little dismayed by what they've seen online, or what maybe they've gone to the wiki page and seen, whatever that fellow's name is who kind of wants to attack NLP, or they've seen something in a psychology paper that talks about NLP being nonsense or whatever. How do you talk about that, and what have you learned about that?
Sure. Well, I think that's an essential component to knowing how the evolution of NLP has failed in certain ways and has succeeded in others. Where do we begin? First of all, there's a premise that NLP is a science, and that right away we should let go of. NLP is not a science.
Right.
It's a combination of art and science that will escape most attempts to study NLP as if it were a science. However, that's NLP as an entire field. There are aspects of NLP that have been studied and are now leading to reliable treatments of specific things. There's a group called the Research and Recognition Project, which has led to a protocol for treating PTSD. There's an interesting history about this, is that it began, that's correct. It began entirely as an offshoot of NLP, as a specific protocol. It's just like a simplified version of the NLP fast phobia cure. And all of the people on the advisory board were NLP related. I mean, all of them. And they've had grants and they've studied it, and they so far outshine the closest comparative therapy. I think the best results with a certain type of PTSD that they were studying came from CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And these folks could do about 6 hours, and they get, in a very short period of time, it doesn't have to be like months and months. The results they were getting was 100% removal of symptoms. Like you can't use the word cured easily. It can't be bandied about. But the treatment had led to a total reduction in symptoms. And the studies were replicated. They were replicated with the same sex. They were replicated with different genders. And there were multiple grants, multiple studies. And except for those people who could not be convinced to come to all of their sessions, like there were a few people that dropped out of the study because they were too nervous to leave their home for whatever reason. But everybody who completed the sessions got almost total removal or total removal of symptoms. that, to my knowledge, have not come back. So we can't call it a cure legally, but we know there's nothing that comes close to eliminating PTSD symptoms. And so, I mean, it's wonderful that now we've got a process that can prevent hundreds or thousands of our veterans from feeling like there's no future, that they have to end their lives. I mean, the number of suicides we can prevent with this thing is staggering. Yeah. And NLP was the source of this treatment plan. It saddens me to no end. I'm not going to let it drift apart quietly. It saddens me that they have whitewashed NLP from the website, because the new board that was hired to help bring this to a larger number of people doesn't think NLP is respected enough and wants this treatment out there. So I understand the reasoning, but I don't like it personally, because of the field getting a bad rap as a result. So techniques, specific techniques, have efficacy and can be studied and have been studied. There are studies that have not passed muster. Many of the studies that I read that did not pass muster, there was something fundamentally wrong with the training, or not the training, the testing protocol. I thought some of them were tested very badly. So I think there's a wonderful opportunity to test certain techniques in the future. But as a whole, we're not going to call NLP a science, nor should we. It's a blend of art and science. And often the difference between getting a great result with a technique is not the technique, it's how good the practitioner is. Do they have sensory acuity skills? Do they have the ability to gain rapport with a client? And how important is that towards gaining a great result? Have they done any values or belief work? How strong is the ecology check that they do before and after the intervention? There's a whole long list of these other constellations of skills in terms of how they connect, such that when they do the single technique that's being studied, it's either done shittily, that a word doesn't exist. It's either done in a really poor fashion, or it's done beautifully by someone who's gifted and well-trained. And that can make the difference between something working and not working. It's not NLP that works or doesn't work. It's how good the practitioner is. Let's call it that. So because of that, it's not just a science, and it doesn't fit into a scientific box by itself.
You know, as a well said on all of that, Jonathan.
Thank you.
You know, as I'm an acupuncturist, and so I'm no stranger to having to deal with conflicting research.
Yeah,
right. It's out there all the time. And here's one thing that I've just noticed over the years is that everybody will say science doesn't back it up until they do.
Exactly.
And eventually they will, because I've seen it. What do you see in all the research now? Mindfulness meditation and all this stuff, you know, stuff that was looked at as evidence doesn't support it. Evidence doesn't support it. Oh, guess what? Evidence supports it now. Right. And the only difference between those things is money and backing to do the studies. And that's the big thing, right? Is that a lot of headlines in articles and a lot of belief in the general population, and even in the scientific community, makes a big mistake. And they say, and what we read is there's a lack of evidence to show this works.
Right.
And the problem is the absence of evidence is not proof that something doesn't work. It just means there's an absence of evidence.
Yeah. Right.
I don't know about what you think about this, but I like to think of NLP as it's a branch of psychology, certainly. What do you think about that? Like for a psychologist to say NLP is not psychology, that seems silly, because it's a branch of psychology, right? I mean,
I don't know if I would say that. I think it's its own unique field. I think psychology is a very important branch into NLP. I think it's one of the major influences of NLP, but we don't do therapy in NLP.
Oh, but psychology is used for sports. It's used for advertising. It's used. So I was saying it's very broad.
Absolutely true.
You know,
I think there's a great deal of overlap. I think what we've got here is a Venn diagram with a great deal of overlap.
Okay.
I like to think that that same Venn diagram occurs between hypnosis and NLP, although I know that there's some hypnosis folks who think that NLP is a small circle inside of hypnosis.
Yeah.
And sometimes just to push buttons, I'll say, "Oh, I thought hypnosis was a little circle inside of NLP." But realistically, I think it's more. We've got one world, we've got another world, and there's overlap between them.
Yeah.
I think depending upon someone's primary focus, NLP could be a branch of psychology, or it could be just an overlap, or it could be. I think of NLP mostly about as a business tool. I mean, I don't do therapy sessions. I have a number of coaching clients where we occasionally do some belief-related work, but I have branded more towards the business aspects of NLP. So I don't get a whole lot of deep therapy calls, although I occasionally get a few, and I won't do that kind of work. I'm just not interested in it. Yeah, I think certainly there's a lot of overlap with psychology, but NLP is too vague and big a field now. I mean, you've got this modeling technology at the core, which has created these little fiefdoms, areas of study where people have captured expertise, and then they're now training that expertise back out to others. Is that expertise that NLP has captured now NLP? I don't know.
NLP is not the applications of NLP, as James likes to say. Yeah.
Right, exactly. If it were, then NLP would eventually encompass everything, which is not fair or real. So, yeah.
It's a meta discipline.
Yeah, exactly. It is a meta discipline. That's a great way of describing it. So
that's James again. Thanks, James.
Yeah. Thanks, James. And so yeah, I think I don't know if I'd call it a branch. My father is a general psychologist, and we've had some lengthy conversations about the overlaps between them. One distinct difference between NLP and the field of psychology is that psychology uses at its core a concept of the personality as a unique entity, according to my dad anyway. And we don't really describe it in those words with NLP. We're more bottom-up sort of an approach. If you're specifically using NLP, as opposed to some of the other techniques, like if you're using tapping or you're using DHE, which is very top-down, NLP is very bottom-up. In other words, you go to the small chunk, you figure out what the map is, and you figure out where to target an intervention, and you use as appropriate or applicable an intervention as you can that's suitable for each of the things that you're doing. And over time, you hit enough of these little patterns that are problematic, and somebody's problem is solved long term. If you are good at what you do and you have all the appropriate ecology checks, then the change sticks. If you're approaching it from a psychology perspective, you'd want to deal with the personality. Maybe you would want to look at what's wrong. The field of psychology historically has looked at what's wrong, whereas with NLP, we're primarily looking at what is optimal or right, what would be best. We're looking for solution states, and then only studying the problem minimally to create a break state or a pattern interrupt that can then lead into the better behavior or better result. So I would say we are more solution oriented than the general field of psychology is. So they want to deal with the problem. We don't. We want to wire around the problem as quickly as possible.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess when I think of psychology at large, I think of it as a study of human nature. Not
that works. Sure.
And then like specific therapeutic methods like Gestalt therapy or the marriage and family therapy model. Those are models for how to approach helping people. But I also think about it in terms of how it emerged from the psychology department of UC Santa Cruz.
Right.
But of course, John Grinder was a linguist, the teacher and all that kind of stuff. But certainly the other two, Pucelik and Bandler, were in the psych department doing hypnosis and having fun exploring ideas and stuff. I don't know. It just it's kind of an idea I've been going with. It's this idea that it's just a big topic, and that it doesn't seem to be right thinking or good, a very discerning kind of comment to act like NLP doesn't belong and it's this pariah or something like that, when it's just it's another set of approaches. It's another whole.
You may be right.
It
may be that I'm replaying thinking that I've acquired just by being in NLP circles, which is that we we haven't really wanted to belong, so to speak. And I'm speaking we collectively, which may or may not be accurate.
Well, I'm just thinking about all those funny but kind of harsh jokes about Psycho the rapists and things like that.
Oh, right.
I mean,
sure.
It's like that's from very early on.
Yeah, that didn't really help things.
No, it did not help things at all. It did not. Oh my gosh.
Well, the way I look at it is, every professional practice has its own frames of reference and models that they use.
Sure.
And it's just a question of deciding what can be incorporated into your scope of practice. So like in occupational therapy, we have all kinds of psychological models. We have all, the sensory integration frame of reference. We have like a biomechanical frame of reference. There's all these different models and ways that we use to organize the way we gather data, and the way we, approach treatment.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me that what we're talking about, like NLP, could easily just simply be a frame of reference that psychology could use. It could easily be a frame of reference that business could use. You know what I mean? And it just depends on like, okay, so if we took an NLP frame of reference and how we approach clients, it would look like this.
Beautiful. This is really resonating. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and really what that just comes down to is each profession looking at research and things like that and deciding what they want to incorporate. It's kind of like saying that is acupuncture medicine? Well, it's certainly a treatment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Could I call it Western medicine? No, I couldn't. But we could see someday in the future how there could be an acupuncture model that could work in a hospital for certain kinds of conditions. And there are places where it does that. So It really is about models of practice coming together and people having their scope in terms of what they do. So I could see that eventually happening.
Well, I mean, you would think with so many anecdotal stories of people who needed to go to a doctor, went to an acupuncturist, and then didn't need to go to a doctor, you would think that would eventually sink into the minds of the populace that, oh, this is a valid treatment for so many things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it true that it hasn't yet? I mean, I guess in the circles I run in, acupuncture is like widely accepted.
It is. It's pretty widely accepted now. Yeah. But it's a good comparison to NLP and like what we're talking about, because they're well-established practices that have their own history.
Right.
But have had a hard time getting into the mainstream. Yeah. Yet, if you look at the research is there now when it once wasn't.
But
you know what I mean? And so
they're still claiming that it's placebo medicine still. There's still articles in 2021 where they're still claiming these kinds of things and ignoring the broader, picture, ignoring the bias in the questions that they're asking and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's funny how all that is, but but it just seems to me that like NLP and hypnosis and all that, if we just look at them as they're just styles or models, it's like saying, well, jazz is real music and rock isn't. We're like, well, wait a minute, music is so broad. It's just a style. It's a genre, and the jazz musicians maybe can't play rock, and the rock musicians can't play jazz, right? Because they have their own intricacies and right. But still, it could be a pretty good concert.
Yeah,
get them all together. It's pretty good. They're all music. So I don't know. Yeah.
One of the really, just to change the subject a little bit, one of the things that is a real gift in Jonathan's class that you don't expect, it's kind of like a bonus, I guess, from going into his course, is that all these celebrities join in the class, and it's amazing how.
It's cool.
Like Clinton.
Celebrities.
Yeah, celebrities. They just sort of join into your class. They just kind of channel through your personage,
Here we go.
It's pretty amazing. Jonathan's is pretty damn good at it too.
So impersonation is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, really good.
All right.
I heard Satch do a few.
Well, let's put a show together. But you're the distinguished guest, so
I mean, what would Clinton say about something like this? That's crazy.
I honestly don't know what he would say, but as I think about it, he might go political on us.
Awesome. That's great. I like it.
It always surprises you. You're in the middle of class and you all of a sudden
suddenly the voice. Yeah.
That's great.
I want to thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah.
Thank you,
This
Arnold.
has been such a pleasure.
Great. Let's talk about a pattern interrupt. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Right? So, oh my goodness.
Walking along.
So, Jonathan, maybe you could take a moment and if anybody's interested in finding out more about what you do, your trainings, how do they maybe talk about your website, how often you do trainings and what that's like? And
Sure. I would say that now that we're in COVID times, all bets are off. I mean, I essentially have moved to a more of a coaching model along with the intention to do more online training. So that's coming together. I've got 2 genius mapping courses, online genius mapping courses. So it's the equivalent of 6 days, but multiple, like around 20 or more 3-hour sessions, whatever is needed to get people to the same level of skill. I honestly don't know how well it's going to work online compared to in person. Now, that uncertainty is not really uncertainty. It's more like I don't yet know precisely what I'm going to need to do to create the same level of result, but I'm committed to it. So we'll have an online Blackboard, we'll have the Zoom room, we'll breakout groups, and people will still be able to do modeling of each other. So I think it's going to go just fine. I just haven't done it online yet. So that's one thing. There's a new website for that called www.geniusmapping.com. And for all of my other offerings and also home study stuff, there's just my last name, which is altfeld.com. I know that's not a great URL, but ALTF as in Frank, ELD.com. And so as I offer other things like so there's some upcoming smaller webinars that will feature Carlos and maybe a few other people. I'm planning on doing more of the genius mapping that we did with you, Satch, earlier in the session.
All right.
So yeah, some interesting online stuff coming up.
Yeah. Well, hey, you have permission to map me out there, with what we just did. So, free reign, public domain.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So normally, if people are worried about having their personal stuff mapped and then shared, I have an honor code rule in all the courses that I run, the genius mapping courses, where the exemplar who's being mapped, they own all the rights to whatever is being mapped. So
that's cool.
At least during the course duration, everything that is mapped belongs to the person from whom it was mapped.
Okay.
There are different deals available to people once they're genius mappers out there in the real world, depending upon how they're being paid. But at the course, each person owns their own expertise.
That's
so
nice.
I appreciate the opportunity. I'll take that one little. You had this wonderful little belief that I'm going to share after we've done this. I'll wait until you post the Authenticity Show links, and I'll say, "Hey, and here's something that we got from Satch. It's awesome."
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool.
And by the way, Satch is loaded with stuff. I mean, there's just
I believe it.
Layers and layers. Yeah. It's infinite. He's loaded with good stuff.
I'm an onion.
Yeah. Layers.
Just keep peeling me. Yeah. And I'll make you cry sometimes. Yeah.
You're so pungent.
I know. I'm a little pungent. But
you're bringing me to tears.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, Jonathan, your website looks fantastic. I love the color schemes. I love
thank you.
design work that Cassie did to make it amazing. It's great. Yeah.
Much appreciated. I'm grateful for everything. So thank you both for hosting this amazing show and for inviting me on. It's such a pleasure to talk to you both.
Pleasure.
All right. Likewise. It's good to have you.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show with your hosts, Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Very special thanks to our guest today, Jonathan Altfeld. If you want to find out more about Jonathan Altfeld, you can go to altfeld.com, altfeld.com. My name is Oliver Altine. I produce the show. I also wrote our theme song, which you're listening to right now. If you're interested, this is a song called Wedding Bells for the Dead, and you can find it on an album of mine called Obsidian Kite. Please subscribe to The Authenticity Show wherever you get your podcasts and find us on social media. That means like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, check out our YouTube page, and you can find our website at authenticityshow.com. Thanks for listening. Have an authentic day.